Tonight on This Week Tonight, we'll have analysis of the crumbling economy as well as updates on a supermarket menace and a presidential infestation. That and more right now on This Week Tonight. Republicans, Democrats, Socialists, and Quakers may disagree on pressing issues, but with the economy in shambles, there's one thing we can all agree on. The party's over for Wall Street. The economic crisis was by far the most important issue of the recent election, but many remain baffled as to how and why this happened. So tonight we check in with former CEO of Portman and Baust Financial Group, Portman, to find out what the future holds for Barack Obama as president. Thank you for joining us. Whose economic policy did you support in the election?
I'm rich, so clearly I voted for John McCain. I've been doing fine until this crisis, but I don't think distributing my own personal wealth is the answer.
So you'd identify yourself as a poor, rich person affected by Obama's economic plan?
Yes, Sean. I've worked my entire life for my 5 houses, and I'm not ready to heave greenbacks for someone else's education or health care. It's involuntary benevolence.
So what do you predict will happen to Wall Street with a Democrat as president?
You know, capitalism is a funny thing. Government regulation on Wall Street is kind of like your parents leaving you the house while they escape for the weekend. We all know that's a high school party bound to get busted.
So, in other words, you're worried that with Obama as president, the government might start taking more of a socialist standpoint?
No. Think of it this way. Let's say you're a monkey in the zoo. You're sitting there on a branch, and all of a sudden some kid starts tapping on the glass. You're not going to know whether you're going to eat a banana or not. That's all I'm saying.
So you're worried about the integrity of the free market system?
Not exactly. I'd like to think about the moon. The same side is always facing the Earth. Sometimes it's full, sometimes it's half, but that doesn't really matter. Now imagine you're an alien who's just landed on the far side of the moon. You might not even know the Earth exists.
I think I follow you. So if you've got a sweater with a hole in it, you know exactly where not to put your finger.
Exactly. It's the simplest way to say that the frogs you catch aren't necessarily the frogs you eat, or that 3 apples don't necessarily equal a watermelon.
Thank you for clarifying, Mr. Portman. The holiday season brings a lot of joyous feelings and happy memories. However, it can also bring tragic pitfalls and horrific disasters. For more, we bring in local man Prandrew Blemish, who recently suffered through a tumultuous Thanksgiving. Thank you for talking with us, Mr. Blemish.
That's not a problem.
So, Prandrew, please, for our viewers, can you revisit that terrible Thursday? And take your time.
Okay, Sean, it was pretty normal Thanksgiving at first. My Aunt Lindsay had made her famous chili, and the Lions were losing. They had scores against them. All seemed to be going fine until we sat down for dinner. I stepped away to use the restroom so I wouldn't have to during my feast.
Certainly not a meal you want to have to get up during.
Not during my feast. But when I returned, the only seat left at the table was directly adjacent to my grandfather Harry, who has bowel problems, and also my drunk Aunt Beatrice, who likes to talk.
Well, that's terrible. Did you really have to sit there?
It was that, or the kids' table, and my cousin Stu just had this kid, and I don't like that baby.
So what topics of discussion took place?
I would have liked to talk about football, the economy, and etc., but those were going on at the other side of the table. On my side of the table, we were talking about who was with who on Meerkat Manor, and then Grandpa Harry just ate a large piece of butter, and it was pretty gross.
Sounds unbearable. Are there any tips you can give to our viewers to avoid falling into a similar dilemma?
You know it. Get your seat early. Wear an extra layer like a sweater to use as a place marker if you have to. And above all, nab a spot within sight lines of the television. If you don't want to make conversation, watch a TV. Also, finish early so that you can get a spot on the couch before your dad does.
Okay, thank you, Prandrew, for sharing your horrifying story with our viewers. With the economy now officially in recession, this year's Christmas will have some changes for most Americans. We now bring in Cal Reiner, author of the new book, How to Tell Your Kids There Won't Be a Christmas This Year, for more on this topic. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Sean.
So tell us, Cal, what is your book about?
I'm glad you asked. Economically, America's in the gutters right now, and it's unfortunately come at what's supposed to be the most magical time of the year. The fact of the matter is, most families won't have a Christmas this year. My book helps parents with tips on how to break the devastating news to their children.
So what can parents do?
Well, Sean, there's a lot of things parents can do. I told my kids that America celebrates Kwanzaa now that Barack Obama is president, so they hate him instead of me. However, the best approach is to use Christmas lore against your kids.
Like telling your kids Rudolph sprained his ankle?
Or dislocated a knee. You gotta be creative in your lies. Also, be sure to plan ahead. Start keeping a list now of the naughty things your kids are actually doing. That way, when Christmas rolls around and they receive nothing but coal, they'll know why. Santa Claus has been stealing the credit from parents for centuries. There's no reason why that jolly son of a bitch shouldn't bear the brunt of the blame now that times are actually tough.
I see. Do you have any advice for parents who don't want to demonize Kris Kringle?
Well, I wouldn't recommend it. I do have a chapter in my book for those who insist on maintaining the purity of Santa. The easiest thing is to just tell your kids Santa has died. And don't just tell them he's dead. Call around local funeral homes and ask if any old man with a big bushy beard has died recently, so your kids can actually pay their respects. This will help them grieve and also back up your story, Sean.
Okay, the book is on shelves now. Thank you, Mr. Reimer, for that helpful advice.
To add to the long list of messes that President Bush has left President-elect Obama and the rest of our country to deal with, the White House is crawling with critters. Apparently, 8 years of leaving half-eaten tubes of Pringles around and wiping Cheeto cheese on every available surface have left the president's home with quite the infestation. The creatures inhabiting the White House are not the standard rats or mice, but rather several strange foreign species. Included amongst them are a Erexius furbius, a pygmy-like creature out of Indonesia, the Conglomus rotundus from Papua New Guinea, and the Amphibius leukemius out of Guatemala. In response, President Bush has once again locked himself in the Oval Office, while Vice President Cheney is currently hunting them with a makeshift flamethrower. In a new study, the American Heart Association has revealed that 74% of Americans are not getting enough protein. They suggest that rather than turning to fatty meats for the missing nutrients, more Americans should have a higher intake of almonds, cashews, and other nuts. Here with us today is head nutritionist from the International Health Council, Freri Slickle. Thank you for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure.
So, Miss Slickle, why are people going nuts over nuts?
Well, Sean, for years, people have had a lot of misconceptions about nuts. Many are hesitant to put nuts in their mouth, but nutritionists agree that there is nothing healthier. You should have approximately a mouthful of nuts at least once a day.
So what are the best types of nuts?
There aren't really any best nuts. All nuts are special, and I find delicious in their own way. Nuts come in all different shapes, sizes, and colors. While some people prefer bigger nuts, you can certainly handle a much larger quantity of smaller nuts.
I see. Are there any hazards involved when you indulge in certain nuts?
Well, it's always important to know where your nuts came from and whose hands have been on them. You never want to eat nuts that have been at, say, a bar for too long. Also, you probably want to stay away from all old nuts in general. Really, just be sure that if you're wary about your nuts, you clean them properly to get off any dirt or stench.
So how can you test the freshness or age of the nuts?
Always by taste. If you get a mouthful of the old stuff, spit them out and walk away.
Yes, nothing is worse than old nuts. Are there ways to spice up the nuts you eat?
I don't know about you, but I've got a soft spot for the raw nuts. Sometimes it can be pleasant to your palate to heat up your nuts a little bit to make sure they don't get too hot, as that may end up busting your nuts prematurely. Even better, go out and get some nut butter, which you can put on almost anything. Just be careful, it can be sticky.
So I've heard. Is there anything else we should know before we enjoy?
Yes, it's best to put your nuts in a little baggie or sack and make sure you protect your nut sack, as they can be very delicate. It's also important to keep them at room temperature. No need to refrigerate your nuts. Nuts don't do too well if they get too cold. They tend to shrivel.
Well, Freri, thank you so much for being here. You certainly know your nuts.
That I do, Sean.
Coming up next, balls, balls, balls. Stay tuned.
When I returned, the only seat left at the table was directly adjacent to my grandfather Harry with the bowel problems and my drunk Aunt Beatrice who never stops talking. Yeah.
That's terrible. Did you really have to sit there?
It was that or the kids' table. My cousin Stu's kid had just memorized High School Musical, and I hate that play. Adjacent to my grandfather Harry, and he was shitting. Sorry.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Blemish.
Not a problem.
So, Mr. Blemish, please, for our viewers, can you revisit that terrible Thursday?
Yes, Sean. Well, it was a seemingly normal Thanksgiving at first. My Aunt Lindsay made her famous chili, and the Lions were getting blown out. All seemed to be going fine until we sat down for dinner. I stepped away for the pre-meal pit stop so the bathroom wouldn't feast interrupt.